With the 2023 NBA season coming to a close, it's time to rank the game's best players. This is the third part of a 5-video series breaking down my top 25. But before we continue the rankings, I'll do a quick rundown of my criteria. The question I'm answering is, if I'm trying to contend for a championship, who's going to offer the most value at that level? This means I'm more focused on the playoffs, looking at the different skill sets and tendencies of each player in the context of a competitive team. I'm also looking at when these players are actually on the floor. Injuries weren't heavily considered unless they directly impacted that player's production. For a more in-depth look at everything I value and the entire criteria, make sure to check out the first video of the series. I'll leave a link to that in the description. Just to recap my first 10, I had Ja, Shea, Kyrie, and PG as all-NBA level players. Trey, Bam, Murray, Harden, Jaren, and Anthony Edwards as all-star level players. And without further ado, let's continue the rankings. Coming in at 15, I've got Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell is the closest thing we have to a running back in the NBA. He's got an incredibly explosive first step and changes speeds as well as almost anyone. But what stands out is his all-time change of direction, cutting all over the court, juking around defenders, and shooting into tight gaps like he's cutting up a defense in the NFL. He also has a ridiculously strong lower body, going right through smaller defenders, occasionally even moving bigger guys, and finishing through contact without much difficulty. These athletic tools fuel his ability to get into the defense, over the last 3 postseasons attempting 5 shots at the rim every 75 possessions, a really good mark, especially for a guard. They also help him generate a fair share of free throws. Although he's generally trying to knife his way through openings, he will initiate and embrace added physicality, seeing a pretty noticeable jump in his free throw rate come playoff time. Throughout his career, his height has been listed anywhere from 6'1 to 6'3, yet with a staggering 6'10 wingspan, and the way he uses that length to throw vicious dribble combinations, take every last extra step to get deep into the paint, and get the ball around rim protection is amazing. He's also an explosive leaper off of 2 feet who can get above the rim when given space to take off, and just has awesome touch down low. That touch helps him on his floater, and when pulling up for mid-range jumpers. And that's the thing, of all the slashers I covered so far in these rankings, none of them had anywhere near the shooting ability of Mitchell. When he can't get to the rim, he just falls back on an all-time pull-up jumper. He's one of the better off-the-dribble 3-point shooters we've ever seen, with a super quick trigger, elite space creation, extreme range, and of course some difficult shot making. This gives him a 3-level scoring threat that leaves him absolutely lethal in the pick and roll, scoring more than 10 points a game on these plays on real high efficiency, just automatic offense coming off of screens. As a scorer in the playoffs overall, he's been one of the highest volume shot creators, but his efficiency lacks just a touch behind the game's most effective guys. I do think he settles a lot more than what you see with guys like Shea or Ja because of that shooting, whereas those guys are always looking to attack the rim, and that does hurt his efficiency. But I also think it's worth noting that in these last playoffs, he went against a team in New York that's really good at protecting the rim, and spent almost all of his time with 2 or 3 non-spacers, so sometimes those opportunities just weren't there. This lack of shooting around him also limited his ability to punish defenses through passing, as his best skill as a playmaker is creating open threes. He's a guy whose range and velocity stand out, tossing out some absolutely beautiful skip passes, and he's phenomenal at using his handle to pull defenders with him and take those extra dribbles or steps as he forces the defense into a complete collapse. His height can limit him at times, but he's able to create some angles over the top due to his vertical pop, going to jump passes out of drives or from way out on the perimeter. I still don't think he's a great interior passer. It's definitely improving, but he just doesn't make those reads nearly as much as some other lead guys. I also think he struggles with tunnel vision at times, missing some open teammates, or forcing the issue with lower quality looks once the offense starts to stagnate. Regardless, he still creates a ton of shots and initiates a load of advantages for his team to attack especially in the pick and roll due to the pull-up shooting, driving, and sharp perimeter passing. If we're talking about value with the ball, Mitchell's probably just a tier below where I view guys like Trae Young and Ja Morant, because they are noticeably better playmakers, but I also think he's better than those two off the ball. Next to Darius Garland, we saw another side of his game tapped into. The sharp, football-esque cutting makes for some real nice dives to the basket, and helps him run defenders into screens when seeking out opportunities as a shooter. I can't stress enough how lethal he is from beyond the arc, constantly relocating and repositioning himself to space the floor, and that ridiculous explosiveness helps him attack off the catch to either finish or extend plays. During his time in Utah with more spacing, he led some near all-time level offenses in both the regular season and playoffs. Just a brilliant hybrid attacker with tons of on-ball value that can absolutely be a contending primary creator, but also play off of another playmaker pretty seamlessly, and to me, that's a strong All-NBA level offensive player. Defensively, Mitchell really struggles to keep the ball in front of him. He's pretty quick laterally and sturdy, but ball handlers generally don't have much trouble beating him off the dribble. This is especially noticeable when there's a screen. Mitchell can be indecisive in what path he wants to take, and isn't a guy who makes a ton of plays from behind in recovery mode. Despite not having much size, his length and lower body strength do give him some switchability though. This season he spent a lot of time defending forwards. He also spent some time chasing off-ball shooters. He's quick enough on his feet and when changing directions to stay attached to guys as long as he knows what path he's taking around those screens. His 6'10" wingspan and active hands help him make plays on the ball, not just as a man defender where he'll constantly swipe for steals, but in passing lanes as well. Off the ball, motor and activity are always an issue, but I do think he looked noticeably more engaged this season than in years past. He was more consistent as a helper, using his length and agility to rotate and clog up space. And even if it's not a consistent effort, one thing that's important is he doesn't have a ton of breakdowns or damaging lapses. His positioning can be off, but generally he's not someone the team is playing in spite of, or actively trying to work around. Due to his limitations, I do feel he's a negative, but I think this was his best defensive season, and definitely don't think he hurts roster construction or causes a ton of issues, which brings him back a hair, but still a very solid All-NBA level guy nonetheless. Next up at 14 is Zion Williamson. When it comes to creating offense at the rim, Zion has the complete package in a way we've honestly never seen before. Throughout all of NBA history, only a peak Shaquille O'Neal generated more force. Force, by definition, is mass times acceleration. So when you have a 284-pound forward with a huge frame and unrivaled power, that also has one of the most explosive first steps in the league, I'm really not sure what the hell defenses are supposed to do. Through 114 career games, almost 69% of his shot attempts have come within 3 feet of the basket, which is significantly more than names like Shaq, Giannis, Prime LeBron, and despite virtually all of his offense ending in one spot on the floor, there's a sort of versatility in how he gets to these looks that's incredibly unique. I mentioned the explosive first step. He pairs that with a really good handle, change of direction, and an ability to get really low that enables him to create from the perimeter. And I'm not just talking about isolations, but in the pick and roll, where he'll force his man into the screen and use that space to just burst downhill, and if given room to take off, just launch at the rim from way out. Now feels like a good time to mention that this freak of nature also has a 45-inch vertical and high-flying acrobatics straight out of a video game, but also has shockingly soft touch. He'll leave the ground with power, but finish with craft at any angle, and that includes adjusting his shot in midair to avoid shot blockers, or using another jump to follow up on the second chance. When jumping into defenders down low, he'll use his massive frame as a shield, can of course finish through contact as well as anyone, and generates a heap of free throws, as sometimes the only way to stop him is to intentionally send him to the line. He'll also create for himself out of the post, where, very reminiscent of Shaq, he's a lightning quick decision maker off the catch, going to ferocious spins and drop steps to set up finishing opportunities, and even the occasional jump hook. I haven't even gotten to the fact that he's just as good off the ball. He has that high feel for filling out space and positioning himself like we see with elite shooters, except these are to set up cuts or easier attack angles from inside the arc. He also has a ton of utility as a pick and roll big. He's a good screener and even better roller, capable of catching with momentum as a finisher, getting it in the short roll and putting it down on a drive, and is of course a massive above the rim presence. That lob threat leaves him a great vertical spacer. He moves really well on the baseline for dump offs or easy outlets out of drives, and as I mentioned earlier, his quick leaping off of 2 feet helps him on the offensive glass. So despite not having a single playoff game to his name, I actually think he'd fare extremely well as one of the few best playoff scorers in the NBA. The versatility of his attack and just how physically overwhelming he is leaves him a mismatch for every single player in the NBA, and enables him to bend or break defenses down at will. This is where you can start nitpicking his offense, because he isn't yet a real strong passer. He's clearly willing and has okay vision, but many of his decisions and deliveries are still noticeably raw. He can only pass with his left, something teams could scheme for, and he's not a guy who's going to anticipate a bunch of openings or really punish defenses for disguising their coverages. It's pretty much all read and react. He can create at volume because of the attention, but I think that's what just holds him back from being an MVP level offensive player. Now, I'm not saying I agree with this, but I'd at least entertain someone making the argument that when on the court and healthy, he's the best scorer in the NBA. And to me, that value is enough to carry him to high All-NBA territory on offense. On defense, this is a guy with exactly 0 minutes of playoff footage to work with, and I'm a lot less confident in how I feel about him on this end than probably any other player. This season he was deployed as a roamer, where he's not a great processor. He'll miss some rotations, his positioning can be off, and he has some occasional lapses that lead to breakdowns. With that said, the Pelicans have implemented a system that essentially pre-positions him so that some of the mental load is taken away, where he can rely on those freakish athletic tools to offer serious resistance. He can cover a ton of ground very quickly due to his agility and length, has pretty active hands that help him jump lanes to initiate the fast break. He can of course explode vertically to meet any attacker at the rim, and he's incredibly sturdy, always holding his ground. With that said, I'm still concerned that better offenses in the postseason would bring him into the primary action and attack him. I mentioned his positional issues. This is especially noticeable when he's defending screeners and has to deter ball handlers. To counteract this, he'll often just switch across the board, which causes its own issues as he has very awkward footwork, especially on the perimeter. He doesn't move well laterally and isn't very flexible, so he's subject to quick directional changes. If he picks up someone in space, it's pretty much a blow-by waiting to happen, and at 280 pounds he obviously can't navigate screens at all, so those generally just lead to more potential unfavorable switches. He does still have that length, sturdy frame, and active hands, so it's not like he's completely useless as a man defender or in space. It just remains a weakness for the time being. In the regular season, I feel pretty good about his defense, especially within the context of New Orleans. He may even be a positive, but come playoff time, I think his weaknesses can be pretty easily exploited, so I do view him as a negative for now, holding him back, but still a strong All-NBA level guy overall. As for number 13, that's Devin Booker. Booker is an absolutely ridiculous shot maker with a super smooth pull-up jumper that enables him to get into his own shot in a wide variety of ways. He's a comfortable shooter from anywhere on the floor, is as good as anyone while off balance or on the move, and has a really high release point, capable of rising over the top of contests, oftentimes unfazed by smaller defenders. He'll create space for himself inside the arc with really sharp footwork, pivots, spins, jabs, and he'll initiate contact with his off shoulder to bump defenders. He also showcases some incredible use of up fakes, which not only opens up more looks, but helps him get to the line at a pretty decent rate. His inside attack is super patient, probing with his live dribble as he hunts for space, and commonly putting defenders in jail as he uses his body as a sort of shield to protect the ball. This season he took 11 mid-range shots every 75 possessions, and hit at a 51% clip. This is an area of the floor that he does a ton of damage in. He's a better shooter off the dribble the closer he is to the basket, as he really likes those high-rise, hanging pull-up J's over the top, but is still more than capable of pulling the trigger from deep, and demands added attention when coming off of screens. This overall versatility allows him to operate in so many different spots, whether that's a high pick and roll, perimeter isolation, face-up isolation from inside the arc, or even the occasional post-up. With that said, he does have to rely on his tough shot making a bit more than you'd like because of some limitations as a driver. Over the last 3 postseasons, he's attempted just 3 shots at the rim per 75, and there are some noticeable issues in the half court. He's not a very explosive athlete, not particularly shifty changing directions, and doesn't have a ton of length, using strides well, but struggling to carve out space. He can also struggle handling the ball through tight gaps, typically just picking up his dribble to pull up for short jumpers, which are lower percentage shots. One thing he does pretty well though is change speeds, and he'll weaponize the threat of his shooting with hesitations or exaggerated crossovers to create some lanes. This works best when he's given space at the point of attack to build up steam, as it takes him a few steps to get to his top speed. So while he doesn't get to the rim much from a standstill, or when dealing with aggressive pressure, with some room can touch the paint, and is a pretty good finisher. You'll see the same sort of things in the open floor. He's a pretty good driver in these spots, and a truly elite transition scorer, not just getting downhill, but hunting out fast break threes, one of the game's most lethal weapons at high pace. He's also pretty good at generating paint touches off the catch. He's a very decisive attacker with quick footwork, taking advantage of open space. These opportunities are there because of that perimeter game. He's an absolutely amazing shooter off the catch, even bringing some shot making off of screens or movement, which draws aggressive closeouts. And he really is one of the best off-ball players in the NBA, whether it's as a screener, cutter, decoy. He's just always engaged, relocating, and then there's that ability to play off the catch as he just torches rotating defenses. The hybrid nature of his attack is really tough to defend, especially when next to another big scorer, and allows him to do damage from all 3 levels. He's played in a lot of playoff games over these past 3 seasons, so we have a pretty good sample of him as not just a high volume, but high efficiency scorer as well. He's one of the best in the game when it comes to putting the ball in the basket. As a playmaker, he's good, but flawed. I talked about his patience and ability to probe with a live dribble, and these are things that help pull defensive attention with him as he maps the floor. He's a pretty strong pocket passer, shoveling the ball through tight windows while moving in either direction, and he's pretty good at lobbing it up top. I also think he has good range, spraying shooters all over the floor with some pretty tough, high velocity deliveries. With that said, I think his vision at times can be a little shaky. He'll miss some openings, and he can sometimes force tough shots with outlets available. He also struggles when multiple bodies are sent at him, as he's not a super quick processor, and in these spots is pretty prone to turnovers. I also think he's very reactive. He'll anticipate short roll openings, but outside of that is waiting to watch a play unfold before making a read, and not actively manipulating the defense in any meaningful way, which separates him from other high-level playmakers. Regardless, he's been either a number 1 or number 2 on some real high-level playoff offenses over the past 3 seasons, and is one of those unique stars who has a ton of value both on and off the ball, which not only makes him more difficult to defend, but also allows him to fit with all types of different players. Overall, I view him as a high All-NBA level offensive player with serious flexibility. On defense, what immediately stands out is the buy-in. As soon as Phoenix became competitive, his effort level was night and day. He plays incredibly physical and handsy, has a pretty strong lower body that allows him to embrace contact, and will use his chest to bump offensive players, although these things can lead to some fouls. They help him off the ball, where he's pretty good at denying passes, and this gives him some utility as a chaser. He's prone to blow-bys on the ball, as he's athletically limited, but I do think he's a solid screen navigator and has good balance, so it's not like he's a cone on the perimeter. He's just solid at most qualities when it comes to man defense, and then away from the ball he won't have a bunch of lapses, but also won't make many plays. He doesn't really jump lanes, isn't a super active helper, doesn't offer rim protection, he's just solid and holds his own. The best way I can think of to describe his value on defense is that he doesn't do a lot of things that add value, but also doesn't do things that would lose it, which leaves him the best example I can think of as a true neutral defender, keeping him at a high All-NBA level overall. At 12, I've got LeBron James. I'll be completely transparent with this one. I had no idea what to do with LeBron as we get multiple different versions of him every season. There was a stretch during this past year where he looked like one of the best players in the NBA. Then he went down with an injury, and after coming back was never quite the same. This is unfortunately the tale of playing at a high level at this age. It's unprecedented, but it's also consistent. So the version of him that we saw heading into the playoffs is the one I ranked here. At this point, he's very clearly lost a ton of burst, lift, and stamina, to the point where getting to the rim from a standstill and finishing through traffic has become a challenge for him. As a result, when he's working from the perimeter, he settles for way too many threes, attempting about 7 every 75 possessions in the playoffs since 2021, at just a 30% clip. He also settles because of the fact that he's 38 years old. By the end of games, his legs are noticeably cooked, and he's no longer the superhuman cardiovascular athlete that can play 48 minutes as a slasher. One thing he hasn't lost though is the brute strength and power. He can still go right through smaller defenders, absolutely abuses mismatches, and is one of the game's best low post scorers, not just because of what he can do after catching the ball, but his understanding of entry angles and how he seals position for super easy opportunities. And that's the thing, as he's aged, he's become more and more like a traditional big, having the qualities to play this role extremely well. He's an effective screen and roll big, where he's of course a wrecking ball of a downhill finisher, but also has the short roll game mastered, as he's one of the quickest decision makers in NBA history. That processing speed helps him off the ball in a multitude of ways. As a cutter, he recognizes openings in the defense well, and if he catches the ball close to the basket, it's pretty much a guaranteed 2 points. Another thing we saw from him in relation to quick decisions is a lot of ram cutting, moving into driving lanes off the catch so that instead of having to manufacture space, it's already there for him to more comfortably get to the rim. Despite not being the same driver, he still gets to the rim at an incredibly high rate, attempting more than 6 shots at the rim per 75 in that same playoff stretch. During that time, just about 5 free throws though. I think he has a pretty unfavorable whistle, but either way isn't great from the line anyways. His perimeter shooting is really streaky, and when he's got that going, he is still one of the best scorers in the NBA, but due to his newfound limitations, isn't creating nearly as much offense as he once was, or at anywhere near the same efficiency. Something that won't ever go away though is the brilliant passing. Because he's not creating at the same rate, there's not as much volume, but when the opportunities are there, not many players in NBA history are better at taking advantage. Whether it's hitting a shooter in the pocket, cutter in stride, roller up top, or on the floor, there's not a pass he can't make, or an inch of the court he can't see, and that will always yield immense value. Whereas LeBron ball is clearly a thing of the past at this point, his utility away from the ball, both on the perimeter and as a sort of small ball big, his interior scoring, and that playmaking ability still leave him a high All-NBA level offensive player in my opinion, which in year 20 shouldn't be humanly possible. Defensively, I have to point out his questionable activity. A lot of times his defense is just a matter of whether or not he wants to put that strain on his body, because we know his IQ away from the ball is off the charts. When locked in, he's great at rotating to prevent shots from getting to the rim, with super quick reactions, great positioning, and active hands. He's not a super high level rim protector, but he'll execute those rotations, occasionally make some plays on the ball. That strength really helps him hold his ground down low, and he's of course a really good defensive rebounder. He can move his feet on the perimeter, but at this point just isn't going to offer a lot of resistance in space, as he's prone to blow-bys and can't really get around screens, although I do think he's pretty good in recovery. Overall, the things he does well are really valuable, but also aren't consistent anymore, and with some of his weaknesses, that leaves me most comfortable calling him a small positive. He can play an impactful role on a strong playoff defense, as he just did this year, and to me, he's bumped up a touch to a very high All-NBA level, just missing out on the top 10. Next up at 11 is Jimmy Butler. Jimmy knows how to maximize every last one of his athletic tools. He's got a great first step that allows him to generate paint touches from a standstill, is a very quick leaper off of 2 feet, which he uses to finish at the rim vertically, and is incredibly strong, a real big 6'7". The way he uses his body and plays with physicality is nothing short of masterful, which not only allows him to create with added contact, but also helps him get to the line at an incredibly high rate. He'll do that through his constant use of fakes as well, which also help him set up his short mid-range game. The way he leverages his interior threat into short mid-range opportunities gives his scoring multiple layers. He can pull straight out of drives, create separation with exaggerated momentum shifts, and doesn't actually need much space to comfortably rise because of how much lift he gets on his jumper, capable of shooting right over the top of most contests. All of these things help him abuse mismatches, and he'll relentlessly hunt for smaller guys on switches with screen after screen to set up open side isolations. And there's some versatility, playing with his back to the basket, facing up from inside the arc, or playing out in space. It's incredibly rare for a defender to have the agility and strength to cut off his attacks, with the length and size to prevent him from scoring over the top, so against most teams he kind of has an automatic advantage. With that said, the lack of a consistent outside shot limits how much he can actually create, and defenses don't really throw the same sort of aggressive coverages at him as a result. Rarely ever will you see him get blitzed off of a screen or doubled off the catch, most commonly seeing single coverage and deep drop in the pick and roll. I also think this softer scheming is a product of his passiveness. He has those moments where he's just unholy, but sometimes he's not looking to attack and seems unengaged, and I think that's what prevents him from ramping up the volume to the next level. As a scorer in the playoffs, he's been very effective, but considering the context of how he's defended and some of his limitations, it's pretty clear to me that he's not a top tier guy in that regard. Still, he does put pressure on the defense and is a good passer. One thing that stands out is he never turns the ball over. His decisions are sharp, and he's not a guy who's going to lose his team possessions. But some of that is a result of him not making a ton of high value plays. A lot of his reads are very basic, and like I mentioned with some other guys, very reactive. I think it's hard to construct a really high level playoff offense running through him as a heavy on ball guy. But he's one of the game's best off ball players, so he'd have no trouble playing next to other creators. He's got extremely high feel, just knowing exactly where to position himself or when to float into space, which also helps him on the offensive glass. He's a super sharp, active cutter, really good at sealing off his man down low for easy entries, and is of course a good finisher. I really want to see him as an offensive number 2. He's got some number 1 capabilities, but I think he'd be a lot more valuable playing off of a true primary creator. Regardless, I think of him as a high-level all-star on offense. But unlike the other guys within this portion of the list, he's also very elite on defense. He might be the best off-ball defending wing I've ever seen. The way he just erases advantages through his constant activity and high anticipation is remarkable. When he's on the floor, no threat goes unnoticed. What's really unique is that he doesn't actually have much length, So the fact that he makes so many plays in lanes and by sitting in gaps is just a testament to his off the charts defensive IQ. He reads offenses better than just about anyone. He's not a guy who offers a ton of rim protection once the ball gets there, but the way he can take away rolls and cuts to the basket just by tagging does help limit those high quality shots. On the ball, I do think he was better at one point. He moves his feet well, but isn't going to lock down guards in space. And he's a good screen navigator, but I don't think he's quite as agile as he once was. So again, it's not as seamless. What he does offer is immense switchability. His strength allows him to routinely match up with bigger guys successfully, and his hands are always active, ready to make plays on the ball. There are very few roles he can't take on defensively, and he's the closest thing we have to a defensive back in the NBA. These things, in my opinion, make him the best non-big defensive player in the league come playoff time, adding near all-star value just on that end. You pair that with his offense, and you get a truly elite two-way wing. In my opinion, a real high All-NBA type of guy, knocking on the door of week MVP. Just to recap my 11 through 15, I've got Jimmy, LeBron, Booker, Zion, and Mitchell as All-NBA level players. To stay tuned with the rest of the list, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on. If you're interested in some more of my in-depth research, make sure to check out my website and social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you agree and disagree with so far. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.